Hello, hello, hello everyone. My name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar, which means that I am the guy that you can come to with all of your Tolkien question needs. If you have a question about, say, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, or any of his other works, I'm generally the guy that you can come to, and if I can't answer you right away, I'll come back to you with a good answer after some time. Anyway, we have 19 questions to get to this time, which is still a lot, but not nearly as much as last time. I try to be selective when I'm picking which ones get featured in a video, but sometimes I do get a lot of good questions. I was very, very busy this week, and I didn't write as much as I would have normally liked to, but, you know, hey. We did get enough done that I could pick a lot of questions for the video. One thing that I had been working on, aside from the Hobbit playthrough that I've been uploading here and there, is another reaction analysis video. We did one with the 1966 Hobbit. I'm going to put a link. Well, I don't need to put a link to that. You can just find it on my channel pretty easily because it's in a playlist under Tolkien Scholar Reacts. But I'm doing the second episode, which is the first part of me reacting to and analyzing the Rankin Bass Hobbit from the 70s. Unfortunately, when I uploaded it, it immediately got blocked by YouTube. So it got blocked because of copyright. And the thing about getting blocked by copyright when you're doing a reaction video, you're supposed to be able to do that. So I sent in the appeal, saying that it's fair use because it is a reaction, it is educational, it is analyzing the work, and it doesn't use the entire thing, it's just a portion of it, because I'm not going to do the whole movie in one shot, because that would take too long. But just to let you guys know that that video is uploaded, and it's not going to go live yet, but it's currently not available to be seen by anybody. Hopefully, we get to the point where they have 30 days to reply. If they don't reply within 30 days, then I automatically win the appeal. I would like it to not take that long. I do fear that this is going to be an ongoing problem when I upload other parts of reacting to the Rankin Bass cartoons, but we're going to push through it and do our best. So anyway, we're going to get into the main content here, and if you like the content, click the subscribe button, because we are in our push for 1,000 subscribers. Currently, as of recording this, is at 952 subscribers. There's probably going to be a graphic on screen that says, as of editing, it's more. At least I hope so. There usually is more by the time I'm editing it, which is the next day. But anyway, let's get to the reading. So I decided to read one of Tolkien's poems, and this is a poem called Errantry. And the idea of errantry was it was originally published in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil. It's not anything about Tom Bombadil, and it's quite a very small poem. Only a few of the poems in the book The Adventures of Tom Bombadil were about Bombadil. But anyway, Errantry is a poem that in universe was written by Bilbo Baggins and is sort of a whimsical fictional tale of a knight, you know, journeying, having an adventure. And it's believed that during the events of The Hobbit, when Bilbo was staying in Rivendell for a while, whether it was before or after, the main events, whether it was on his way to the Lonely Mountain or on his way back, there was a point where the elves told him some of the great adventures of the First Age, and Bilbo did not necessarily take it seriously. Later in his life, he would probably come to realize that these were all true, because Bilbo, in universe, is the one that translated the work that they would know as translations of Elvish lore, which we would know as the Silmarillion. However, the idea was that they told him these stories, and he didn't really take it seriously. He thought they were like whimsical fairy stories, the sort of things that hobbits might talk about or write crazy stories that didn't really happen. So he wanted to write his own version of a whimsical sort of tale, an adventure based on the ones that the elves told him. So here we go. I'm going to read the entirety of the poem because it's not very long. There was a merry passenger, a messenger, a mariner. He built a gilded gondola to wander in and had in her a load of yellow oranges and porridge for his provender. He perfumed her with marjoram and cardamom and lavender. He called the winds of Argosies and cargoes in to carry him, across the rivers 17 that lay between to tarry him. He landed all in loneliness, where stonily the pebbles on the running river Darrelin goes merrily forever on. He journeyed then through meadowlands to shadowland that dreary lay, and under hill and over hill went roving still a weary way. He sat and sang a melody, his errantry a tarrying. He begged a pretty butterfly that fluttered by to marry him. She scorned him and she scoffed at him. She laughed at him unpitying, so long he studied wizardry and sigildry and smithying. He wove a tissue airy thin to snare her in, to follow her. He made him beetle leather wing and feather wing of swallow hair. He caught her in bewilderment with filament of spider thread. He made her soft pavilions of lilies and a bridal bed, of flowers and of thistledown, to nestle down and rest her in, and silken webs of filmy white and silver light he dressed her in. He threaded gems and necklaces, but recklessly she squandered them, and fell to bitter quarrelling, and sorrowing he wandered on. And there he left her withering, as shivering he fled away, with windy weather following, on swallow wing he sped away. He passed on archipelagos, where yellow groves the marigold, where countless silver fountains are, and mountains are of fairy gold. He took to war and foraying, a harrying beyond the sea, and roaming over Belmarie and Thelemy and Fantasy. He made a shield and morion of coral and of ivory, a sword he made of emerald, and terrible his rivalry, with elven knights of Erie and fairy with paladins, that golden-haired and shining-eyed came riding by and challenged him. Of crystal was his habergon, his scabbard of Chicaldony, with silver-tipped at Fenelune, his spear was hewn of ebony. His javelins were of malachite, and stalactite he brandished them, and went and fought the dragonflies of paradise and vanquished them. He battled with the Dumbledores, the Hummerhorns, the honeybees, and won the golden honeycomb, and running home on sunny seas, in ship of leaves and gossamer, with blossom for a canopy. He sat and sang, and furbished up, and burnished up his panoply. He tarried for a little while in little isles that lonely lay, and found there naught but blowing grass, and so at last the only way he took and turned, and coming home with honeycomb to memory, his message came, an errand too, in daring do and glamoury. He had forgotten them journeying, and attorneying a wanderer, so now he must depart again, and start again his gondola, forever still a messenger, a passenger, a tarrier, a roving as a feather does, a weather-driven mariner. It's quite a good poem, and it sort of starts and ends in the same way. And you can see, if you sort of read into it a little bit, a lot of elements of some of the stories that Bilbo might have been told by the elves of particularly the ones that I kind of cottoned on a little bit there were Beren and Luthien and the Fall of Gondolin, which were some of the oldest stories that Tolkien wrote, so it kind of makes sense. But anyway, we're going to get to your questions now. So let's start, as we normally would, with the first one. Okay, so here's the first question. Real simple one. Are Thranduil, Galadriel, and Celeborn related? Yes, both by marriage and by blood, though very, very distantly by blood. All elves are related by blood, as they all descend from 3 elves who were brothers. Of course, the relationship between, say, Celeborn and his wife Galadriel, who, they were married, but their actual blood relationship was so far apart that they might as well not be related at all. The same would be true of Galadriel and Thranduil. However, Thranduil and Celeborn might be more closely related, still not very close, but a little bit more closely related, because they're both Sindar elves, and they're both said to be kinsmen of Eleuthingol. So if they're both related to Eleuthingol, then of course you can say that they're related to each other distantly, although not as distantly as the other configurations there. They're probably very, very distant cousins. Okay, next question. Can you provide a some examples of characters with royal blood in The Lord of the Rings. There are quite a bit of royal characters and noble characters in The Lord of the Rings. In the Fellowship, for example, we have two royals. Aragorn, of course, became the king of Gondor and Arnor, and Legolas was a crown prince of the Woodland Realm, also known as Mirkwood. Not originally. Originally it was Greenwood, but at the time it was Mirkwood, and by the end it was the Forest of Green Leaves, which interestingly, green leaves, if you were to say that in Sindarin, it would be Legolas. There were two nobles, Gimli and Boromir. There were three aristocrats, Frodo, Merry, and Pippin, and an actual angel, Gandalf. So Sam was the only one. He was sort of the regular guy of the group. Even Merry and Pippin would wind up with larger stations. They became more than mere aristocrats. They became knights and lords later on. Even Sam rose up from his humble roots, essentially ruled the Shire alongside Pippin, though he was an elected official where Pippin was more of a bloodline thing. Some realms don't have royalty, but they have lords that behave as so. Elrond, Círdan, Galadriel, and Celeborn. Though a lot of times in the text, and even some of the characters would refer to Galadriel and Celeborn as the king and queen of Lothlórien, they always refer to themselves as the lord and lady. They don't think of themselves in that way because Lothlórien had a king who was named Amroth, and they were not related to him. They inherited the realm because they had come to live there, and the elves who had lost their king sort of just adopted them as their leaders. In Mirkwood, of course, Legolas's father was Thranduil, and he's the king, and his wife is never mentioned, but she does exist, so there is a queen. A lot of people, whenever I bring up Thranduil's wife, they try to tell me, well, she sailed west, or she died, or any such thing. No, Tolkien never mentioned any of that. The whole idea of her dying came from the Hobbit films, which are very not accurate to the lore, and a lot of that story was actually borrowed from a different character. It was borrowed from Celeborn, who was Elrond's wife, and she didn't even die. She sailed to the west, although she had a close call. Then, of course, there's Rohan. They have a royal line, and Éomer becomes king. He takes over after Theoden passes away, and his sister Éowyn is essentially a princess both by birth and by marriage. Faramir and Imrahil are princes. There were other leaders such as Fangorn, Sauron, Beorn, and such, though they're all by conquest or by appointment, not by blood. There's Brand, who is the king of Dale, and Dane the Second Ironfoot, who is the king of Erebor, also known as the king under the mountain, though he does die in The Lord of the Rings. His son, Thorin III Stonehelm, becomes king after him, and then his grandson after that, Durin the Seventh the Last, became the king of Moria. So there are quite a few royals in The Lord of the Rings. Okay, next question. Okay, so this is a really interesting question. In Tolkien's world, do elves have free will, or is everything predetermined by Eru Ilúvatar? Every being was created and designed to have free will. Ilúvatar, you can call him that, you can call him Eru, you could just call him God, made everyone that he made, at least, had free will from the top down to the bottom. The most powerful being that he ever created was Melkor, the mightiest of the Ainur of the angels. And he had free will enough to rebel against his creator, even being told very early on that he was not going to win. Nothing he could do could mar the beauty of creation. He could only add to it, but he still tried his best. He still had that choice. He still had free will. So that being said, the elves certainly have free will. They're just stuck on Earth, or Arda, until its conclusion. While men get to die, and they get to go to heaven, and they get to be with their creator, the elves might be stuck on Earth, but they are free to do as they will, and they are certainly not puppets. So creating thralls, or beings that have no free will, is considered to be one of the greatest evils, which is why Ilúvatar came down so hard on Aule for creating the dwarves, because Aule did not have the power or the authority to create beings with free will. Seeing the regret and the repentance that Aule displayed, Eru gifted free will to the dwarves, allowing them to live as his adopted children. Okay, next question. Here's quite an interesting question that came in from Brian Perkins, who asks, is elf immortality a contributing factor to the lack of technological advancements in Middle-earth? It's a great question, and I would say that that is not the true reason. It might be the in-universe justification, in a sense. The real reason that there are no great technological leaps in Tolkien's world is simply that he didn't want it to be that way. It was the fantasy of the author. He longed for a world that was less like the one that he lived in and more like Middle-earth. The Oxford countryside of his youth, or at least the way that he remembered it, was very different upon his return from the Great War. It wasn't the way that he remembered it. And he lamented the machines that blotted the countryside, the cars that made too much noise, and when you drove them, you might have enjoyed yourself, but you don't enjoy nature. Everything goes by very quickly. Fantasy, by its very definition, is meant not to be realistic. It's meant to be immersive. It's meant to be escape, but it's not meant to be realistic. And the long and short of it is that there isn't anything that the elves need technology for. They are not merely immortal, but they're also magical in nature. As for the things that can only be done with technology, the elves don't want to do those things. The only race that seemingly strives for technology in Tolkien's world are the goblins, who could not create beautiful things, but they could create cunning things and they could create deadly things. Tolkien believed that the love of craft can lead one down a very dark path. We see this with many characters that are craftsmen falling, such as Feanor, Kuramo, who was known as Saruman, Mairon, who was known as Sauron, and Eöl. We see those that have good intentions put too much into their crafts and it leads to disaster, like the dwarves. And we see those with excellent intentions teeter on the brink, like Aula, who I just mentioned. The love of making things is not evil by itself, but it is a road that can lead to evil, which reflects the thoughts of the author, that technology is not in and of itself bad, but we lose something along the way when we invest ourselves too deeply in it. So really, I would say that it's not because the elves live forever that they don't advance technology. It's because they don't need technology and they don't really want technology, so there's really no reason for them to develop technology. Okay, next question. Okay, here's a question that came in by a request of Tyler, who asks, was everything in Middle-earth as beautiful as Lothlórien during the First Age? Is this reflected in any of the First Age writing? So, quick answer is no. There were other realms whose beauty would rival Lothlórien, but that was not the entirety of Middle-earth. Middle-earth wasn't all like that. Lothlórien was not merely made to resemble the great wonders of the First Age, but specifically the timeless beauty and majesty of the Undying Lands, which Galadriel left to come to Middle-earth. In the First Age, there were forest realms such as Duriath and magnificent cities like Gondolin. They existed and they were beautiful and they were wonderful. But the entire land was not all like that. There were places just like any other. It wasn't that everything was wonderful. It was that there were more wonders. Okay, next question. Okay, so here's a really interesting question. What would Saruman's fate be if Mordor won the war and he was still alive in The Lord of the Rings? So he would have been in very great danger, I think. Saruman was never really an ally of Sauron. Both were trying to use the other for their own gain. Sauron was just a lot better at it. Saruman wanted to get into Sauron's good graces and then later betray him. But the thing about that is that he was not aware of is that Sauron knew this the whole time. He was aware of the deception from their first contact. Sauron was just willing to go along with it because Saruman could, at the very least, trouble his enemies, and at best, maybe even leading to recover the One Ring. He was sort of a useful idiot for Sauron. The issue here is that Saruman, at the very best, was a miserable failure. He not only failed to defeat Rohan, but he allowed the One Ring to pass into the hands of Isildur's heir, or at the worst, maybe even gave it up willingly as far as Sauron was concerned. Sauron was never going to let Saruman go unpunished for his attempted ruse, but Saruman proved that he wasn't even useful. So if Sauron had won the war and Saruman was still around, Saruman would probably want to hide. Okay, next question. Did Gandalf ever wear a ring of power? Yes, actually. He had one on the whole time. The entirety of the time he had one on. It was just invisible. The Maya spirit that was called Lothlórien arrived as an Istar, which means wizard, in Middle-earth in the year 1000 of the Third Age. And upon arriving, he was pulled aside by Círdan. Círdan's one of the oldest of the elves, he's one of the wisest of the elves, and he surrendered to him Narya, which is one of the three, which had previously been entrusted to him by Gil-galad. So Círdan perceived that out of the Istari, Lothlórien, or Gandalf as he would later become known, was the wisest, and he thought that the ring would be better off with Gandalf than it was with him. The three were well hidden. Even as Gandalf and Elrond and Galadriel wore them, they were not visible to other people. Even when Galadriel in The Lord of the Rings revealed her ring to Frodo, only Frodo could see it. Sam was right there, and Sam could not see the ring. She even asked him if he could see the ring, and he said no. She was holding her hand up to the star, Eärendil. So he says, I see Eärendil. I don't see your hand. He says, I don't see the ring. So at the Grey Havens, though, later on, Frodo and Sam were able to see all three rings and even noticed that Gandalf was wearing one. They had lost their power, so they were not invisible any longer. Okay, next question. Okay, here's a question that comes in from the request of Ella, who asks, what language did Morgoth and his forces speak in the First Age? So they probably spoke a bunch of different languages. Melkor, in the very earliest years, would have spoken a language called Valiant, which was the language of the Valar. As he communicated freely with the elves, he would also be familiar with Quenya, and likely Sindarin as well. He also was able to have a conversation with Hurin, so he spoke Hadarin, which was one of the mother tongues of later Mannish dialects such as Adonaic and Westron. In the book The Lost Road and Other Writings, Tolkien spoke about an early concept that he had where Melkor devised his own language, which he called Orcian, or Orkin. And it was the mother tongue of all Orcish tongues and was later named Melkian after Melkor. However, the concept was later discarded. Melkor could probably speak any language that he wanted to, and he just spoke whatever he needed to for any such situation that he was in. I can understand fully why Tolkien discarded the idea that Morgoth made languages, and him devising a tongue to speak in, it seems odd. Who is he really talking to on a regular basis other than Sauron? Okay, next question. Here's a question that comes in from the Oski Boski, and I really like this one. How does the Fellowship of the Ring trick Sauron at the end if he is a mastermind trickster? Good question. They basically allowed him to trick himself. Sauron was indeed a mastermind trickster. However, he had been caught with his pants down, so to speak, a few times, and both were because of his hubris. The first time happened in the Silmarillion. Sauron was completely humiliated by Luthien. There was a prophecy stating that Huan, Hound of the Valar, could only be slain by the greatest werewolf. And Sauron figures it. He's a shapeshifter, so he believed that he could just become a werewolf himself and slay Huan. Not only was he unable to kill Huan, but the Hound gripped Sauron in his jaws so tightly that Sauron could not escape no matter what form he shifted into. Luthien taunted him, telling him that he could easily escape by abandoning his body, but she took advantage of his hubris and told him that if he did that, he would basically have to go back to his master, Morgoth, nude, because the bodies that we see of the Ainur are just their clothes. So when they're in their spirit forms, where we don't see them, we can't perceive them, they're considered naked. So Sauron surrendered. He did not want to go back to Morgoth, essentially in the nude. In the Third Age, Sauron was conned because the forces of good took advantage of the way that he thinks. He saw a hobbit in the Palantir, which he assumed that Saruman still had the Palantir, so he assumed that Saruman had captured a hobbit, and he assumed that the hobbit that was captured by Saruman was the ring bearer. The Nazgûl came, he sent the Nazgûl right away. They came to Orthanc and they found no Palantir, they found no hobbits, and then suddenly Sauron is contacted again by a tall Númenórean man who has Elendil's blade reforged. He has the ring of Barahir, he has the Elisar, and he's declaring himself to be the future king of Gondor and Arnor. From Sauron's perspective, it seems as if the Palantir, the halfling, and more importantly the One Ring, had passed to this man Aragorn. So he acted accordingly with this belief. You can't trick a trickster. Aragorn doesn't lie to Sauron. He doesn't tell him that he has the One Ring. He lets Sauron make his own assumptions and jump to his own conclusions. You can't trick a trickster, but you can make a trickster fall on his own sword, so to speak. Okay, next question. Okay, here's a question that came in by request from Sam K, who asks, in the Middle-earth narrative, when Sauron openly declared himself in Mordor in the Third Age 2951 and began to rebuild Barad-dûr, why didn't the forces of Middle-earth immediately attack him? Did they not believe Sauron when he declared himself? Real simple answer here, he's stronger than they are. The last time that Sauron was attacked by the forces of Middle-earth, in the way that you're describing, the forces of Middle-earth won, but at a great cost. 2/3 of the elves of the Woodland Realm were wiped out, and Elendil and his son Anarion were dead, as was Gil-galad. Then follows years of the elves leaving Middle-earth, the kingdoms of man falling to plagues, to wars, to civil wars, and a great thinning of the Númenórean bloodlines. Sauron lost in the Second Age, but he weakened the free people of Middle-earth so much, and they had experienced so many other diminishments that attacking him in that fashion was not going to work a second time. It was called the Last Alliance, not because men and elves would never be allies again, but because they never could bring the band back together in that glorious of a way, in such numbers and with such force. Okay, next question. Okay, what would happen to Gollum if Gandalf had brought him to the Grey Havens and sent him to Valinor in chains to have his mind and body healed instead of setting him free in Middle-earth? There's a problem with that, but two things would happen in this scenario. Firstly, Gollum would just die. He could not handle goodness. He hated the smell of malern trees. He would not enter Lothlórien. The touch of an elvish rope is terrible to him. He described it as burning him and freezing him. There's a reason that Gandalf gave Gollum to the Wood Elves. He didn't set him free. That's the issue I have. Gandalf didn't set Gollum free in Middle-earth. He gave him to Thranduil. There's a reason that he chose Thranduil instead of like Galadriel or Elrond. They're less holy, and Gollum could be in their presence without pain. Being in the presence of Valinor, would not only kill him, but it would probably be incredibly painful. The second thing that happens is Sauron wins the war. Gollum is completely mandatory to destroy the One Ring. Gandalf knew that he had a part to play, and that it must be played. Okay, next question. Okay, Ben Dean Hui, I hope I'm saying it right, asks, are there any descriptions on how Angband, Morgoth's second fortress, looked like? Was it like a traditional dark castle, like Minas Morgul and Barad-dûr, or was it more built into the mountain volcanoes like how Erebor looked like? So the descriptions are that Angband was massive. That's the main thing we know. And that most of it was actually underground. Angband has a visible entrance. There is a fortress that you can see, and it is actually built into a mountain where the peaks of Thangorodrim are. The 3 peaks, they're not actually mountains, but the elves called them volcanoes. They were more like industrial chimneys, slag heaps that were piled up that acted as the smokestacks for Morgoth's furnaces, which were all underground. The elves saw what looked like smoking mountains, and they called them volcanoes. Angband was actually massive, but most of the structure was underground, and with tunnels that would go off in every direction. It is actually possible that the Balrog that fled from the War of Wrath, and was later called Durin's Bane, took one of these tunnels all the way from Angband to underneath Khazad-dû, Moria, without ever coming up. Okay, next question. Is Mount Doom still volcanically active after the destruction of the One Ring? Probably not. I'm going to say no to that. Mount Doom was created by Morgoth a long time ago, but Tolkien wrote that it was inactive until Sauron came to live in Mordor. It was also mentioned that Sauron had control over the eruptions, but the catastrophic eruption that it had as it consumed the One Ring was probably the last one that ever happened. The mountain was only active through Sauron's power, and with his power being so fundamentally broken at this point, it seems likely to me that Orodruin, or Aemon Emarth, or Mount Doom, would go silent for the foreseeable future. Next question. In The Lord of the Rings, was Gandalf wrong when he told Faramir that his father Denethor loved him and that he will remember it in the end, even though he tries to burn him alive? No, Gandalf was correct. Denethor did love his son, and he did remember it in the end. It's hard to see love in Denethor's actions, but he has also been driven completely mad by Sauron, who has convinced him via the Palantir that there is no hope. Denethor has fallen completely into despair, believing that Gondor is at its moment of destruction. Denethor's attempt to burn Faramir was not him thinking that he would take his own life and take his son with him, but that he believed his son was already dead, that he was killed, and he was filled with despair. Obviously, Boromir was his favorite, but he completely falls apart when he believes that Faramir has been killed. In his madness, he doesn't even react well to being told that Faramir is still alive by Pippin. He believes that he will die in pain and misery anyway, if not from the sickness of his wounds, then from being captured and tortured by Sauron's forces. He wishes to spare himself and his son the pain and misery of torture. Now, Gandalf rightly points out that this decision is utterly wrong, but I have to point out again that Denethor is insane at this point. He's gone completely mad. He cannot be reasoned with. His feelings have taken over, as have the words of Sauron. Okay, next question. So, here's a question that come in from his name has me all flustered. The requester's name is Plum Bum. Are the Stewards of Gondor somehow related to the line of kings? They absolutely are, yes. This question came in and another person answered it, and they pointed out, very rightly so, that in the appendix of The Lord of the Rings, Hurin of Emyn Arnen, who was the first steward whose name was recorded, was from the line, and from his line all the subsequent stewards came. He was mentioned to be a highborn Númenórean, but Tolkien did not specify anything further. This is absolutely true, but there is another source beyond just the Lord of the Rings appendix that gives us more insight. In the book, The Nature of Middle-earth, Hurin of Emyn Arnen was mentioned to be related to King Menardil in an unspecified way. He was a kinsman. This usually means he's a cousin of some sort, or he's related to him but descended down through the not the male line, the female line. So, giving Hurin and his descendants royal blood in this sense, but no claim to the throne. This would mean that, for example, Faramir and Aragorn are very distantly related. Of course, there's not that many characters in The Lord of the Rings, other than like Gandalf and the hobbits that Faramir or Aragorn aren't distantly related to. Okay, next question. Okay, so Matt Wren here has a Nazgûl question. Is much known about who the Nazgûl were individually before they were turned into wraiths, and did Sauron choose them specifically? We know almost nothing about them. We know that Sauron did, in fact, handpick them. The Nazgûl were mortal men. They were handpicked by Sauron as they were all either his followers or evil men who he knew he could control. Here is all of the information we know about them, which is not a lot. One of them was named Kamul, and he was an Easterling, though the definition of that word, Easterling, changes based on who's using it. He may have been from Rhûn, or he may have been from Rhovanion. 3 of them were Black Númenóreans. The Black Númenóreans were men of Númenor who formed a splinter group called the King's Party, and they colonized Middle-earth and enslaved its inhabitants. They later came to serve Sauron, and he taught them black magic, and that's where the name comes from. And they were described by Tolkien, all the Nazgûl at least, were described by Tolkien as being tyrants. That's pretty much it. The Nazgûl are a mystery. Only one of the 9 is named, and only one has a title, which is the Witch King, but that's about it. Sorry. Okay, next question. If Ungoliant didn't betray Morgoth with the Silmarils and become one of his top commanders, would the outcome of the war in Beleriand still be the same? Would she have spawned great spiders even bigger than Shelob to help Morgoth in his war? No. And I think that there is a little bit of a flaw. The question itself is faulty in a pretty important way. The flaw here is that Ungoliant did not betray Morgoth. Morgoth betrayed Ungoliant. He had made a promise to her that if she entered into his service again and helped him destroy the 2 trees of Valinor, that she would get to feast on all the jewels of Formenos, that he will feed her with both hands, that was his exact words, until she is satisfied, and that if she was not satisfied, he would find more treasure for her to devour. The issue, of course, is that Morgoth was lying. He had no intention of honoring this promise. He did feed many of the jewels of Formenos to Ungoliant, but she noticed that he was only feeding her with one hand, and demanded that he honor his promise, and he gave her the hard no. So when she attacked, he called his Balrogs, who came in with whips and drove her away. I've long suspected that after Ungoliant left his service the first time, he devised the whips of the Balrogs specifically to deal with her, if the need came, because the Balrogs could then strike her from a distance without being in danger themselves. So if we accept that Morgoth had already taken anti-Ungoliant precautions, and that he was lying to her from the get-go, I don't think he ever thought that she was going to stay in his service. She had done the useful thing, and now he was no longer interested in her, and she was not one to serve others. Okay, next question. Okay, so here's another Gollum question. If the One Ring was destroyed while Gollum was still alive, could he have mentally become Smeagol again and found redemption since its influence on him was gone until he died a natural death? Unfortunately, no. I think he was too far gone. He was too bound to the One to survive its destruction. Gollum made the One Ring his entire personality. He didn't know how to be without it. Even being shown kindness by Frodo, he still could not help himself. He was too consumed by his desire. Tolkien entertained a hypothetical situation where Frodo and Gollum had grown even closer. And this ended with Gollum destroying the One Ring and himself. Gollum would waste in despair if he did not take his own life outright. He would allow himself to just waste away. There isn't a happy ending for Gollum. What happened to Gollum was the most merciful and the least painful end for him. Okay, last question. In The Lord of the Rings, what did Galadriel want to tell Gandalf in Lothlórien, but was unable because he fell in Moria? So we don't know that she had anything specific to say, only that she wanted to talk to him. Galadriel stated that she wished to speak to Gandalf. Her exact words were, "I much desired to speak to him again." This can indicate that she might have had something to tell him, or that she had something to ask him, or that she just wished to put her head together with him and to share their mutual concerns. Galadriel knew the nature of Gandalf. She was one of the few elves in Middle-earth that actually knew that Gandalf was an angel. So she foresaw his return, and she asked Gwaihir to find his body and bring it to her. She was ready with white robes and a new staff. So her foresight was great. Whatever discussion that she wanted to have with him, she probably had with him then. We just weren't privy to it. Okay, so that was the last question, and if you enjoyed the content, please hit the like button. That helps me out. And if you haven't subscribed and hit the bell and turned on notifications, you should do all of that as well. We are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and if you really want to support me, consider membership. Membership is really cheap. It's only like $5 a month, and you get to see all the videos early. You get some cool emotes, and you get a badge on your name and everything. So that really does help me out, the membership. So consider that. You get to see every video a full week before anybody else can. I will see you guys next time.